Hi everyone, thanks for tuning in. Today we're going to work on an assignment called the Lebowski Project. It's as fun as it sounds, and it's relatively simple, but there is a certain level of complexity in it. Basically what we're going to be doing is creating a page that looks like this. We're gonna have it's a fake website, basically, an online magazine with a logo, a little tagline. We're going to build a navigation. We're going to have a little hero image over here. And we're going to break it down into some stories with the sidebar and some extra features. Overall, we're going to look at everything from working with typography and importing Google Fonts, adding interaction with hover effects in the navigation bar, working with images, and a whole bunch of HTML and CSS related stuff to basically give us a page that's relatively easy on the eyes by the end of it and works fairly well. Now this is just a demo page. These links aren't going to actually go anywhere. It's a one-pager. So let's get started. We assume that you have at least some basic HTML knowledge and CSS knowledge. We will be looking at some code at some point. I'll go slow to make sure everybody understands. And the starter files have already been provided to give you guys a little helping hand to get things off the ground. We're going to be using Dreamweaver CC primarily for the editing. You might choose a different editor, that's fine, whatever you're comfortable with. I will be using a lot of doing a lot of demonstrations in Dreamweaver, but that doesn't mean you can't follow along with the code and achieve the same results. After all, Dreamweaver is nothing but a little front end to accessing the code, and think of it as training wheels so that once you get better with the code, you won't even need stuff like Dreamweaver in the future. Okay then, moving right along, let's take a quick look. This is a JPEG that's included in the package that we're about to download, which is basically the first step. We need those files. So depending on where you're viewing this tutorial from, whether it's on YouTube or my website, you'll be able to download the files associated with this video. And you should get a little zip package which you should save in an area that you can retrieve later on. And once you have that downloaded zip file, first thing you want to do is extract its contents. So depending on whether you're on a Mac or a PC, it doesn't matter. You can just extract all. You can use a third-party application. On a Mac, you just double-click it and it should create a folder automatically. So if we extract to the Lebowski project, we should get a folder that contains all the files that we'll need for this assignment. Now if we look at the files here, we have a starter page HTML. That's going to be our basic structure. And we also have a styles.css file, which is going to be our external style sheet for formatting, layout, etc. There's a Facebook code.html package here. This is pretty much useless to us because unless you're publishing this on the web, that code isn't activated. But we'll have a little workaround. In the assets folder, you'll find some extra elements. Site mockup is exactly that image we were looking at a bit earlier. If you double click it, here it is. And this is going to be our visual reference. This is what we're working towards. So starting with our starter page, which is going to look pretty plain, you'll see when we open it, we're going to work towards building this particular layout. I've also included the Photoshop file that was used to create this mockup. From that, we'll be able to extract images and export certain graphical elements that'll be helpful in our page. I've also included a placeholder image. So in place of that Facebook code that would have put in a Facebook feed on our page, I basically just created a little screenshot so we can fake it, and it'll create this element right over there. That's about it for now. There's also some background patterns here which you can see in the dark gray areas of the mockup you can use as a background, but we'll get to that slowly. The way this is set up is I've broken it down into different components, this tutorial. So there's a few parts that you can follow along with rather than one long tutorial. It allows you to skip ahead or just avoid areas that you're already familiar with and keep things moving along. What we'll start with is looking at the structure, which has already been created of this document, seeing how the classes in CSS are connected and linked. And we'll start with the easy stuff first. Easy meaning that the ones that'll have the most impact with the minimal amount of work. Things like connecting our Google fonts, adding our images, making sure our layout is correct, before we start working on the more detailed and time-consuming parts, things like the navigation bar, spacing, padding, all that stuff. So we're going to build it from the ground up and go step by step. Hope you can follow along, and let's have some fun. All right, keep this open on the side just in case you need to refer to it at any point. Now that we have our files unzipped, our first step is going to be creating a workspace in our Dreamweaver application. So let's start that up. So there we go. We load into an empty space. Thank you. All right. And for starters, what we'll need to do is access the Files panel, which is located here in the top right. All your panels are here on the right-hand side. Always remember that. And if you don't see the panel you need, you can usually find it under Window, and the list over here should give you the file panel that you're looking for. For example, in this case, Files. You can also press the F8 key. These are the shortcuts on the right. We'll open this window here. We're going to create a new workspace. So to do that, in the Files panel, you're going to click on Manage Sites. We're going to create a new website, and we're going to call this the Lebowski Project. So we can easily identify it in the list if we have a lot more websites that we're working on. The local site folder is the site on your computer where your files are located, and those are the files that we unzipped earlier on. Specifically, in my case, they were on my desktop. You might have them in your Downloads folder, your Documents folder. What's important is that you remember where they are, so that now you can use this little folder icon to browse and find them. So in my case, they're on the desktop. There's the Lebowski Project. This is as deep as I want to go. Here it is, the Lebowski Project. This is the folder that's the root of my website. Select. And that's really all we need to do for now. There are other settings here which we'll look at maybe at another time, but for now we just need the workspace set up. Click on Save. Click on Done. And now in the Files area, you have access to all the files that we were looking at a bit earlier. Now it's very important if you're going to do any file operations, meaning if you're going to start renaming things, if you're going to start moving things around, it's important that you do that within the Files window here in Dreamweaver, because Dreamweaver will keep track of the links and the relative associations between files. So if you start moving stuff around or renaming stuff, Dreamweaver will take a note of that and update the necessary links appropriately so that all your stuff still works. Remember, a website is made up of a lot of moving parts. They all have to work together and know where everything else is. If you start moving things around in your File Explorer, then Dreamweaver loses track of what's where, and your code is now no longer intact. So keep that in mind. Try to conduct all your operations here. This is a relatively simple site. We only have one. Technically, it's a one-pager, so it shouldn't be too hard. But you never know. Keep that in mind. All right, so we have our starter page over here. We have our styles.css over here. Let's start by double-clicking starter page and see what's under the hood. Now, my interface is set up in split mode. So I have the visual reference here at the top. And down here, I have access to my code. Don't forget, if you're familiar with Dreamweaver, you'll know that if you select something in visual mode, it'll automatically select it here in the code. So it keeps, it makes working with code a bit more friendly and easy, and keeps you from getting lost in all the tags here. But it's still very important to keep track of what's going on, and always keep an eye out here, because Dreamweaver, even in visual mode, it's not perfect. Sometimes it glitches out, sometimes your finger slips and bad things happen. So always keep an eye out on the code and make sure stuff remains as it should be. So what we have here is, as I mentioned earlier, the basic structure of our document. We have the page width that's already been set, the major container that holds all the pieces together. We have a placeholder for our logo. We have our navigation bar, which is composed of an unordered list. We have a little placeholder image here that's going to be replaced with that big graphic. And further down we have, the area where, this is where a story would be. If we compare it to our visual here, right? So this is the story headline. That's the placeholder, for food. We have some text here. That's the deck over here, the subtitle. We have an image, content, a little button. So this is stuff that we're going to have to build from scratch, but there's already a container that's going to hold it in place. We have our footer down here, and over here on the right, we see some code for what's going to become the sidebar. So the sidebar is going to look like this. If we look at this visual here, we have the newsletter sign up over here. So that's it, that the form is going to go over there. The Facebook feed is going to go right beneath it over here. And we have some social sharing icons down here at the bottom that we're going to be adding in. Now obviously this is completely unformatted, but eventually we're going to get to this spot in actually fewer steps than you can believe if you stick around and be patient. So first thing we're going to do is, like I said, the broad global things that we can take care of right off the bat, to get them out of the way, because they're relatively high impact with low effort. And the first thing you want to do is start working with typography. Now this file uses an external style sheet, and you could see that it's already connected here because you can switch from one to the other. So you can see that here's the source code for this document, and there's also a link to your styles.css, which you can see over here. Now if you click here, your code view down here will swap to that external CSS file. For some of you that's good enough, because it makes sense for you. You can switch back and forth between your document and your external file. If you prefer, you can also open your styles.css here. So double click there, and it's going to open as a separate tab. Now whether I work here, you'll see this text over here is exactly the same as this text over here. So when you make changes in one, it pretty much synchronizes. This is your workflow. You decide how you want to work. We might switch back and forth. We might just use this, whichever you're more comfortable with. Ultimately, keep in mind that regardless of how we put in our CSS code, whether we do it like this, directly in our CSS file, whether we enter it here in code view after switching between source and styles, or whether using the CSS designer over here, which we'll get to in a second, it really updates this one style.css document, which controls everything. So first things first, we want to import some fonts and get some things happening. Let's open a browser window and go to google.com/fonts. And to see what happens next, I recommend you watch the next video. Thanks for tuning in. Check out video number 2, which shows you how to integrate Google Fonts into this exercise.